This is The Recap, a weekly reflection on the sermons of Fellowship Baptist Church in Mainville, Ohio, seeking to help you make Jesus essential in every aspect of your life. I'm your host this week, Ryan Land, and I'm here with the preacher of this week's sermon, Brent Wilson. Brent, welcome back.
Good to be here.
Brent, what was your first job?
That's easy. My first job was working for I had to think about it. I was like, had so many like random little jobs. My first job, though, was working for my grandpa, who owned Wilson Tire Shop. And so when I was 13, I started working with him on the weekends and then later even after school. And so changing tires, man.
Wow. My first job is not that interesting, but the situation in which I had to get the job is interesting. My first job was at an after-school program. I was like a teacher at essentially like daycare that started after school for parents.
How old are you?
Parents that worked. I was 14.
Okay.
But the reason I got the job was because maybe I was 15. But the reason I got the job was because I had gotten a ticket for disturbing the peace because I threw water balloons at like a community event that was going on at our town.
Yeah.
And we got caught and I got a ticket and my parents said, we're not going to pay for any of it.
So you had to get a job to pay for it.
You got to get a job to pay off your ticket. And so that's where my first job came from.
Nice.
So I think my parents were like, we won't buy your gas. It was like usually I think my brother and sister got their first jobs when they were 16. I had some payments come up earlier than my need for a gas payment. And so I had to get a job a little earlier than them. Well, I ask because, this week's sermon was about work. The gospel changes how we think about work, how we do our work. And so lots to think about, lots to, I think, very applicable and, for all of us, right? Because we like you bring out in the sermon, everybody works, right? No matter if you have a job or not, everybody has work.
Everyone doesn't get paid to work, but everybody works.
Everybody works. So these were you had 6 points you kind of drew out of the sermon, really rooted in the opening account of the creation of the world and the creation mandate or the cultural mandate to Adam and Eve. So let's just run through these, and we got a couple of questions that we will get to answer. So anything generally you would want to say about work or about the sermon or anything before we dive in?
Well, I think I would just say that this sermon and 2 weeks ago, so the sermon on Christian worldview, are two topics. They're kind of the same topic. One's just a little more specific, but that have been just kind of been ruminating in my mind for years, really. And both of these sermons, I really think are just a prologue to the topic. And it's something that I'm still kind of learning and growing in and thinking through, but just to think Christianly about the world. And, I think about work and work particularly. I think I say this at the beginning, we don't think of a theology of work or have a worldview of work, Christian worldview of work. And so, in some ways, I felt like this sermon was a little bit like a lecture disguised as a sermon. Just a lot of content, cerebral sort of content. But it's something I feel like we really need as we are just trying to live faithfully as Christians in the world and think rightly. So
I do see how the worldview sermon and this sermon are almost like a part one, part two. Especially in this sense that everybody works all the time. And so I do think it's helpful. It's like we want to think Christianly, we want to think gospel centrically about everything that we're doing. And so you were right to pull out at the beginning that we think of this as largely disconnected from our spiritual life. Like I go to church on Sunday and then I go to work on Monday, and those two things don't really influence one another. Like it might morally, and I think that's the easy way. Like there's two really easy ways I think we think about the gospel changing work. It's like, well, don't make immoral decisions at work.
Right.
Don't steal, don't lie, don't, whatever. Or like, hey, go share the gospel with the person in the cubicle next to you. Like that's like the two ways we kind of think about those two things intertwining.
Which are both true.
Yeah. But not all of it. It's like a Venn diagram. And it's like if that's the only crossover you have in the middle of sharing your faith and being moral. It's like you're seeing like this much of the picture when it's like actually the entirety of your work fits under the scope of a Christian worldview, of a gospel worldview. And so let's dive into these. Let's dive into these points. So one, work is our original purpose, and so pretty clear from the text. Pre-fall, Adam and Eve are given a task. And we talked about this, and I'm curious what you'd say. We talked about this in 7th grade Sunday school a couple weeks ago, and someone asked, well, if God made the world and he said it was good, why did they have to take dominion over the animals? Why did they have to expand the garden? What would you say?
Well, I would say goodness and completeness aren't the same thing.
Yeah.
So something can be good, and it still needs not work to improve it, but work. That's interesting. Just kind of word choice there. Like not work to make it from bad to good, but work to make it organized. Right. Things can be good, but still need cultivated.
Yeah. Well, and it's the expansion of a good thing, right?
Yeah. It's like the garden's only here, and they're supposed to take it across the whole world.
Yeah. And it doesn't say, and he called it perfect.
Right.
Right. And so he could the command is to expand the garden, to cultivate the garden, and it's not work in always the sense we think of, because the work's going to be hard stuff comes later. But there is this sense that's like even in a good pre-fallen world, we're meant to work,
right?
And so and we'll get this. We'll get to this a little bit later, I think, or maybe we can just talk about it here. But that God, the first thing we ever see God do is work.
Yeah.
And so, like at one level, the Imago Dei is rooted in
a God who works.
Yeah, in working.
And so we are sub-creators.
Yeah, and so like our identity as people made in the image of God is not just about the spiritual stuff, like love and whatever you might say, but even in like our bringing order out of chaos,
right,
is an aspect of being made in the image of God.
Yeah. It's so for me, like to sum up the sermon in one line, in some sense, it is to say, when you go to work, the work itself is actually sacred. Not just going to work and being moral and sharing the gospel, but the work in and of itself is actually good and particularly Christian thing. And so that has major implications on how we go to work and what we do.
Yeah.
One thing me and you talk a lot about, I think we maybe talked about this a little bit last time, is when we were kind of dogging on the Christian movie Facing the Giants. It's like when Christians make a movie, it should be the best from a quality, from an acting, it's like, because we believe in a God who is beautiful and good and creative and all these things. Like, well, if we're going to reflect God in our work, Christians should make the best movies. Not even particularly Christian movies. Like, you make a movie about whatever, it should be the best.
Yeah. And so that kind of moves us into our next thing. I think that topic is that work is not just our purpose. So it's like we're meant for it, right? I think there's a lot we could say, and we probably will say later. It's like this is what our calling is, in a sense. When on this earth, is like our purpose is to work in some way. We're not to be like the sluggard, you talked about.
Well, so it's interesting. I originally called point one. I changed it. That work is commanded. So I was originally going to say, and as I thought about this more, it's like it is commanded, but God, what God commands becomes our purpose. I've created you for this task, and I'm giving you this task, commanded this task of you, and so our purpose is directly linked to what God has told us to do. Yeah. And so you see, God has told him to do three things: be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. So expand the garden, take dominion of the animals, and then subdue the earth, cultivate it. So
and so that's our purpose, right? And then to like move that over, the logical conclusion is your next point. If it's a purpose given by God, well, that means it must be good.
Yeah.
And that work is good, not just for us, but for the world around us. So talk about that a little bit. Work is good.
Well, you see that it's good, like we said, in the fact that God does it and is doing it still in the world.
Yeah.
And so so it must be good. It's good because it's pre-fall. I think it's really easy for us, if we don't think about it, to think that because work now is such a slog sometimes, and it's difficult, that's bad. And I think we have a picture of heaven of flying around playing harps. That we think, oh, one day this work will cease. But in reality, our work's only beginning. And so when Jesus is coming to make all things new and redeem it, but there's going to be a day where work is redeemed and we continue to work. And so it's good. It's right for us to do it.
Well, and there's a sense in which, we start with a garden. The Bible, the biblical story begins with a garden and ends with a city. Did you mention that in your sermon?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like there's this progress that happens in the biblical narrative. It's like we're going back to all natural, baby. Like,
we're not going back to to loincloths and swinging from vines or whatever. You mentioned a word at the beginning.
Riding a tiger or whatever. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. But you mentioned at the beginning. I didn't use this word. I didn't really have time to define it, talk about it. But it's an important word. You said the cultural mandate. So that's what theologians often refer to Genesis 1 and 2 as this cultural mandate. So to subdue the earth is to build culture. And so when you're subduing, you're bringing it under your will and domain. And so to build a bridge over a river is to subdue the creation, to use a river to make a water wheel that's going to produce power. Is to subdue the creation. And Randy Alcorn in his book Heaven talks about like how the new creation, this new earth, as we continue to work, is not the garden. It's not going back to live in the wild. It's a city, like you're saying, and we're going to build rocket ships, and technology is only going to continue to increase.
Protein synthesizers.
Yeah. So so there's a question of whether or not we get to eat meat because there's nothing going to die. And so I've always said that, like in Star Trek, there's a protein synthesizer. So we'll have a microwave looking thing that'll just make fake meat, but it'll actually taste like real meat.
Yeah, I was about to say we already have that.
Yeah,
impossible.
Doesn't taste like real meat.
Well, the other thing, it's like, and this is just so interesting, and gosh, the beginning of Genesis is just so good for, as a setup for all kinds of biblical theology.
Yeah.
But it's like I think sometimes we teach kids that the sin of the Tower of Babel is it's like they're trying to get to God. They're trying to build a tower so big that they get to God. And that's actually like not what the text suggests at all. No. Is it right before the Tower of Babel or right after you have the Table of Nations? I can't remember.
I think right after.
And so it's like the idea was that, they're supposed to go out
so it's
and
interesting.
build culture.
So right after the flood, when you read the flood narrative, all of the language is it's a redoing of the creation narrative.
It's a recreation.
Yeah, and so they're commanded again to spread out. To take dominion, to subdue, and to be fruitful, multiply, and expand. And what do? They huddle in one spot. And so it is, again, not doing the work God called them to do. And that is the reason for the judgment.
Yeah.
And
then they get spread out.
Yeah, God's like, you won't spread out? I'll do it for you.
And it gives them and then I think you're right. I think the Table of Nations is after, because then it's like he spreads them out and you see all of the people groups that have been created because of that. And so it's like this sort of like the reverse cultural mandate is like, hey, let's all just get together and build one thing, and we're going to stay right here and just do our own thing. We're not going to go anywhere. It's almost like a sluggard kind of idea that's like, we're going to kind of do what you said, God, but not really. We're not going to do it to its fullest extent. And so, even there you see that it's like, no, God wants us to go out and not just to work for work's sake, but to build culture, to build society.
And I think this idea is important, is that God could have done this himself, but he has made us as his image bearers to go in his stead to do this. It's very much like the New Testament parables of a steward, right? Like, I'm leaving you in charge to manage my estate for me. Go and make it better. And God has left us in charge as his little kings and queens, vice regents, to rule in his stead. Yeah. And as we spread out, what spreads by proxy? The image of God. we're commanded not to make graven images because we are the image. And so we're supposed to spread out, build the world and make it magnificent to the glory of God, so that the glory of God will cover the dry lands as the waters cover the seas. And so it's important to understand that God's made us to do this work for him, to his glory, for him and for human flourishing.
Yeah. So. And that work is good, not just in this sense that it's like morally good or like God told you to do it, but it actually has like this beautiful purpose, this like master purpose.
Yeah, it's shalom in a sense.
Yeah, no, so it's creating shalom.
Yeah. It is this universal flourishing. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. But all that to say, work is temporarily difficult. Because of the fall. And I thought this was so interesting, this point you made about the curses being directly related to the commands or the purposes of God. And so talk about the tell us about the curses a little bit, and then how that affects our work now.
Yeah, I honestly hadn't thought about this till I jumped and started studying that the curses are these direct attacks, not on them as individuals or personally, but on their work. The curses make their task given by God harder. And so it attacks the be fruitful, multiply by pain and childbirth. It attacks their relationship together. There's going to be a strain between this marriage relationship. And so they're not going to work like in shalom and harmony together. And the ground itself is going to fight you in wanting to grow things. And so just interesting that the work itself is now going to be harder. Pleasing God and doing what he wants is now going to be harder because of sin.
Yeah. And I think that this is, this is like where the rubber meets the road for us. And that there's this cultural sort of notion that it's like, whatever is good is just whatever makes me feel good. Just whatever I like. And so it's like, well, I'm not going to get a job until I find that the one job that actually makes me happy.
Yeah.
Or that makes
it's almost
me
like the one for the job.
No, that's exactly right.
What I was made for.
Yeah. And so it's like, well, it's supposed to make me, if it's right, it's supposed to make me feel good.
Yeah.
It's like, that's just like not the case.
Right.
It's like, it sometimes it feels good to lay around and eat chips and play video games and whatever. I was reading an article when we were prepping for this called "We Asked NEETs." If you don't know what a NEET is, NEET, and it's not what it used to be on.
Not education, employment, or training.
Yeah, not in education, employment, or training. And it was like, we asked NEETs what they do all day.
Yeah.
And it was just like the most, off the wall, like bizarre stuff. Like this person was like, I get up at 6 a.m., I do yoga, and then I work on myself all day. It's like, what does that mean? What do you mean work on yourself all day? If you work on yourself, go get a job. So, it's like, but that's where this sort of cultural idea is like, I read something when I was looking at that article. It's like 1 in 5 teenagers, or no, it was 18 to a certain age, maybe 22, 23. It was like, is a NEET.
Okay.
Like, so not in education, employment, or training. And so it's like, that's where this point is like, because it's hard, we don't want to do it.
Right.
And yeah, I don't know. It's just like, that's just not how we think about the world.
Well, yeah. And so I talked about how because of this fall, there are 2 extremes that we can fall into, 2 problems because of sin. Either on the one hand, we can become somebody who's lazy, become the sluggard. I love that word, sluggard.
I've used it a couple times for you.
I appreciate it.
You talk about how much you loved it.
And so you can become this lazy person who rejects work and just wants to have fun, or you can overwork.
Yeah.
Right. You could sacrifice your family on the altar of career and advancement and just work yourself to death. And so there's this balance, but like there's a reason that work is incredibly fulfilling. And so we got to
quit jumping to all the other points.
I know, it's sorry, they all blend together.
But no, I think that's true. And it's like, and you've talked about this some in some of your preaching, is the sort of like the new prosperity gospel. It's like, where you're not like these churches that kind of preach this new prosperity gospel, that Christianity is all about making you happy, healthy, and wealthy. Yeah. It's like, they're not going to talk about this because they're saying, like, what we're saying is this aspect of God's creation is hard right now. and it's not always going to make you happy. It's not always going to be fulfilling. It's not always going to be,
sometimes it's a slog.
Yeah. But what we don't say is then it's like, well, then I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just give a personal example. Like, it's easy to think, oh, if I'm a ditch digger, sometimes going out and digging ditches is hard work or if I'm a roofer, like it's hot outside, whatever, it's hard. But even office jobs, like even in ministry jobs, sometimes it's like I have to write a sermon every week, and sometimes it's a slog.
Yeah.
To read again, to study again, to preach again. Like it's a lot of work.
Y'all think I want to go hang out with your teenagers every week all the time? No, I'm just kidding. I do most of the time.
Yeah. That's the fun part.
But I even thought about, even pre having the job, like getting a job can be difficult.
Sure.
And it's like, and again, not that this is all job related.
Right,
it's like just like work related. But like, I think a lot of the times what I see in teenagers now is not that they're averse to like the work that they would be doing. It's not that they don't want to do like the job. They're averse to like the anxiety that it would build to like go to an interview or like have to deal with customers or have to deal with managers or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that's what prevents them from work. It's not I just want to be lazy and I mean that's obviously part of it.
Sure.
But they just want to say, oh no, I just like it makes me too anxious to send an application, to do an interview, but I think so even that is a result of the fall. It's this fear of rejection, of embarrassment, of giving up part of yourself. Like, I don't know. But so it's like, it's not always like even the work itself is going to be hard. It's like, the pathway to doing the work is hard. And so I'm just not going to do it at all.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, there's kind of the two ditches on the other side, right? The two, what is that called in bowling? Gutters. Two gutters. And so it's like, I think if you overemphasize this point that work is temporarily difficult, I think you tend towards the being lazy, being a sluggard gutter. But so then your next point is that work is for God. And as I was listening, I had this question and I wanted to ask you about it. So it's like it's like we want to do the best work or the most beautiful work, the most efficient work, the whatever. How does that how does that not drive us to the like hustle culture of we got to be the best, we got to be the most efficient, we got to be working the hardest, the best. Like, how do we protect ourselves from that while still thinking of our work being for God?
It's an identity issue. A lot of times when you're doing that hustling and I've got to beat the competition and I got to rise and be the best, it's because you have this idol, and we can say an idol of work, but it's deeper than that. It's this idol of if I am powerful, if I'm rich, if I am looked at in a certain way, then I'll be somebody and I'll feel. And so the gospel removes that idol. It should, like the gospel, when you understand it, removes that idol. It's like, I don't have to be the CEO. I don't have to be whatever. I can be faithful right where I'm at. And if the Lord, it's kind of like Joseph, like if the Lord, Old Testament Joseph, if the Lord decides to move me up, then he'll move me up.
Yeah.
It's like, Joseph goes to Potiphar's house and he's a slave and he works his way all the way to the top, and he's in the dungeon and works his way all the way to the top. And so it's like, you can be faithful right where you're at. And it's good to work hard, but I don't have to grind to become somebody. I am in the gospel in Christ somebody.
Yeah, but your motivation in your sermon you talked about, it's like because we're working for God, we want to do the best work possible. Right. It's like how do we balance that truth with also taking care of our so it's like this is very easy for me because I work in ministry. Yeah. Right. It's like it's very easy for me to think about my work being for God.
I see. You're saying I'm doing this work for God. How do I not overdo it?
And so it's like I could justify spending 12 hours a day at the office, reading and writing and meeting with students and just totally neglecting other aspects of my life, my wife, my house. I could not be mowing my grass, whatever. But I say, but this is for God. And so I got to put, but it's like, but you could take that logical conclusion out to anything, right? I'm going to go out to my yard with scissors, and measure every blade of grass and make sure they're all equal because this is for God. So it's got to be perfect. Like forget all that other stuff I need.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that?
Well,
because that was the tension I felt.
No, it certainly is. It certainly is a tension to be managed. On the one hand, you got to say, well, everything that you're doing is for God, and so your marriage, your law, like all of those things, and so you can't focus solely on one of those things to the neglect of the other ones, because then you're failing at your other work. So in some sense, it's balance, realizing a whole picture of your life and everything that you're a steward over, and so that brings some balance. But also the gospel itself, it's like God is not angry at you because your grass is bad, right? And so it's a motivation. I guess it's just not over going past the line. It's like it's a motivation to do it well, to not cut corners, and to be good at the craft and work hard, knowing that we're always going to be growing. So I don't know,
not to be a perfectionist, but to work hard at it. And I think the language, like the not cutting corners thing, is helpful. It's like you're not being lazy. You're not going to work, and you got an office job, and you're like pulling up, YouTube and whatever in one tab, and you're just like, and then when your boss comes around, you switch over. It's like you're being faithful in your work, you're being honest in your work. But I think what you say is right. Is that it's like we can have rest in our work because we know that God's not actually like,
and we can know that our work now, it's never going to be perfect.
And
so don't strive for that. Just strive to do the best you can.
And that's the thing. I was just like, even if I can't do, I got my job, I got my work at home, I got my family. It's like, and you're telling me I'm never going to do any of those good enough. Like, how do you get your head above water? Well, it's like actually like the gospel says, you don't have to do any of, like, you cannot be all things to all people.
Yeah. Good enough isn't the standard. It's not, it's not that I'm trying to do it good enough. I'm just trying to, I guess it's akin to like, your wife's gone and you want to clean the house really good for her when she comes home. She's going to go, oh, wow, this is awesome. Or you mow the grass and you want her to look at it and go, man, I love the way you keep our grass. Like she's not coming down and like, hey, you missed a spot, right? She's just going to look at it and go, man, I love the way you upkeep our lawn. And so it's like, hey, I worked hard so that she would see it and it would be pleasing to her eye and to our neighbors. And so I think in the same way, it's like, I'm also doing this for someone who matters way more than all these other people.
Yeah. And I also think just in this sense, that's like, we actually can have true rest. And I think like the other side of the coin of this conversation is talking about Sabbath and like what is rest, but that would be like a whole nother episode, I feel like. So, but that part of this, that the work is for God, is that actually like our rest is not found in our work. It's found in the work of Jesus. And so like we can actually rest, not in this being lazy sense, but in an identity sense, like you were talking about, like I don't have to prove myself to God that I'm a hard worker. I don't have to prove myself to my wife or to my boss or whoever that I'm a hard worker. And so I think, looking at your work as being for God, a God who is already pleased with you because you're in Christ, it's almost like how we talk about giving, right? It's like it's an outflow of how God already sees us. It's not an input. Our work, it's not an input for God. It's an output of who we are in Christ and what Christ has already done for us. And so I actually think there's a sense in which rightly seeing your work as for God protects you from both gutters.
For sure.
Because you're looking at God wrongly when you're like, I've got to do all these things to keep up with God's standard.
Yeah. It definitely keeps you right in the middle.
Yeah.
On the knife's edge.
But we're always going to.
We're always teetering,
ebbing and flowing.
The gospel
between
keeps
the
centering
two.
us.
Yeah. So work is for God, and then this is like a dreadful thing. I wasn't there on Sunday, so I had to watch it on live stream. But it's like, can you imagine just being there and you're learning all this? You're like, yeah, work, and then you pull out the work is eternal slide, and you're like, oh my gosh, you can't be serious.
Yeah.
So what do you mean work is eternal?
Yeah, but it's like in the reality that the work is going to be redeemed, and so no longer is it going to be a slog. It's going to be only full of joy at some point. Yeah. And so it will last forever. There's a sense in which when Jesus shows up, when Jesus is on the scene, and he goes and he calms the storms. Shout out to Jacob's sermon last week. He calms the storm. He's doing that as a God who has all this power, but he's also doing that as the true Adam taking dominion of the world, subduing the creation.
Yeah.
He has authority over the storms as Adam should have. And so there's a sense in which in new creation, as we continue to subdue the earth, that Jesus has ultimately done it, and now he's like, here's how you do it, guys, and we're going to continue to go do it. Here's a line that I didn't use in the sermon because I would have needed more time to flesh this out, or people could have took this the wrong way. And you also have to kind of understand biblical words, or like Christian words that you may not. So I didn't want to go into it, but there will come a day in new creation when the Great Commission will end, but the cultural mandate will last forever.
Oh, interesting.
So the church's mission right now is both cultural mandate, Genesis 1 and 2, and the Great Commission, make disciples of all nations. And we often maybe overemphasize, but we emphasize the Great Commission to the neglect of the cultural mandate. And we do that because it's a temporary mission that is on us right now. But it won't last forever. There will a day's coming when we don't make disciples anymore.
Because everyone is one.
Yeah, everyone's a disciple. There's no one to reach.
Yeah.
And so, but this cultural mandate, this build culture, subdue the earth, take dominion, spread the garden, will last forever. And this is speculation, but Randy Alcorn talks about in his book Heaven how this new creation and even this first command isn't to the earth, but to the cosmos. And so it is to expand the glory of God across the universe. And so he talks about how we'll build spaceships and go to the Andromeda Galaxy and spread the name of Jesus to all the planets and stars, but not in a evangelistic. No, not an evangelistic way. In the same way that Adam and Eve were supposed to do this.
Man, where are we going, Brent? Where are we going first,
bro?
I'm hitting up Pluto. I'm be like,
it is a planet,
bro. You're a planet. We're here for you.
That's right, dude.
We're here for you, Pluto. So just like, well, we need spacesuits.
No idea,
man. Lots to think about.
We'll find out.
So Nathan has access to our document here, and he's been live updating it as he's at work. But he put this Piper quote in that I think is really helpful. Piper talking about in his book "Let the Nations Be Glad," worship is our eternal occupation in the new creation. It's like that. I mean, starting now and into the eternity, right? But it's like that's what you're talking about when you're saying carrying Jesus' name forward.
Yeah, but it's when people say worship.
Yeah, no, this is helpful.
Like they think music.
Yeah, they think we're going to be in like a
worship service forever.
A million. And I remember thinking. So you ever get like when you were a kid and you would think about this, you get like a little bit existential about it. Did
about like eternity?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So this is how I was always imagining it in my head. It's like, it's heaven. And you know how like the camera in a movie like will pan out?
It just doesn't stop.
And it just doesn't stop panning out. And that's how I would think about it as a kid. It's like the camera just panning out.
No, for me,
until I got scared. And
I just think about
think about this anymore.
It will never end. There's not a stop. And it really breaks my brain.
Yeah, it's like that song.
Which one?
The song that never ends. It goes on and on.
Yeah.
My friends.
But yeah, so worship, like certainly there's going to be singing and maybe worship services of some sort. I have no idea. But worship as work, as everything that we do. There's big house. We
can play football.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of food.
Yeah. And so really when we think about new creation, it's really like the world as it was meant to be. And so I used a word intentionally in the sermon. I don't remember the exact sentence, but it's like I used the word like a true society. Like that's what's coming is the right, good, true, beautiful society as it was meant to be. And so this isn't like, oh, we're going to the jungle and we're going to, live in the wild. This is like skyscrapers and bridges and rocket ships and whatever else we might invent for the glory of Jesus' name. So we've got to adjust our picture of that.
Yeah, and it's in like the worship in like the Romans 12 sense, like your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. It's not your singing that is worship. It's your life that is worship. And so it's like in your eternal life, you will continue to be living in worship. Everything you do will be in worship. It'll be perfect.
Yeah.
A perfect worship.
Yeah.
So then lastly, work is satisfying. So what did you mean by that? What did you not get to say that you wanted to say about work being satisfying?
Just, for me, I like to do woodworking. And whenever I make something and it's finally finished, without fail, there's just a moment where I just stand still and look at it. And it's like God on the seventh day saying, this is good. And I think as Tolkien talks about how we're sub-creators and we create, and there's just this deeply satisfying reality anytime we put our hands to something and we create something. Because we're all creating, whether you're building a spreadsheet, mowing the grass, like we're creating or we're cultivating, we're taking unorganized chaos and making it organized beauty. And so whenever we do that, sometimes we forget to do this, but a lot of times we stop and go, man, that looks good. That spreadsheet's baller. And so when you go work your tail off on something, it's just when it's done, it's like, man, that's great. Look at that thing.
Yeah.
And it's just, there's a satisfaction to it, I think, because it's who we are as image bearers.
I don't know how this is just in my head. I don't know how this connects. But I saw a thing recently about light poles that were constructed in England in like the very early days of electricity, like public lighting, and then like light poles how we have today. And they're kind of built now that you don't see them. It's like, there's like, we just largely don't, we build light poles or whatever it may be, some public things like to not see them. But you go to these places in England or in Europe or even in the Eastern United States, it's like there's like these beautiful like iron light poles, and no two of them are identical or whatever. And it's like they built these things with purpose, with beauty, with excellence, value, with thought, right, and care. And so there's a sense in which like even just like our work or our jobs, we can rob like the sacredness because we're just like, well, we're just throwing this up and we don't want anyone to see it, and we don't. It's like, but how do we make the things we do beautiful? Yeah. It's like, and that's why I think, when you talk about your woodworking, it's like because you have many times you've built it by hand for a specific person with a specific purpose in mind. And it's like, that's when you can say like, I am proud of this. I'm satisfied in this. Cause you can see like, it has an ideal, it has a value. Yeah. And so like finding those things, finding those ways to energize your soul when you're working is like, what is the value? What is the beauty? What is the purpose of this thing that I'm doing? Yeah. Not just, am I doing a spreadsheet? But it's like, who is this going to serve? Yeah. How can it serve them? Well, yeah, it's like, best?
This doesn't, I don't get as giddy about this, but I've seen people who, they'll make a spreadsheet and it communicates to the person that they're trying to give it to, like the company's data. And it's like revealing these truths about their trend lines or whatever. And they're just giddying over the moon about how they've developed this spreadsheet. And it's like, man, that truly is like, that's awesome. It's great. It's good.
Yeah.
So
I remember I was an intern at a church in Louisville, and we were making a big video. It was like the church's like 10th anniversary, and I didn't write. There was like a script for like a video. I didn't even write the script, but my job was just to copy edit the script. So it's like fix any typos, fix any clunky sentences. Yeah. And I did that, and I remember being like, oh my gosh, like so excited when I saw the final video and I heard the script being read. I was like, whoa, I copy edited that script.
No doubt.
And it's like, who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares? But it was like the video was so
you cultivated it,
encouraging, inspiring, like people loved it, right? And so knowing it's like I worked just a little bit on this thing.
Yeah.
Is just, I think it's energizing.
For sure.
It's like, and definitely reveals, I think, the Imago Dei in us. So well, all right, let's move on to some Q&A. And then we've got two that are particularly related to the sermon and one sort of more kind of theological question. So we'll stick with these related to the sermon first off. This person says, they hit you with the holy, holy, holy. I thoroughly enjoyed your message about work. And then ask, is this the basis of the Protestant work ethic? And can you expound on that?
Yeah, two thoughts. One, appreciate the thoroughlies.
I know 3 times.
Well, particularly in this sermon, I felt in the middle of the sermon, I was like, man, I don't know if this is landing with people or not. Like, it's just a different kind of sermon. And so
inside the work, you weren't satisfied.
Yeah. And so that was encouraging to me. So whoever you are, thank you. Well, I asked you beforehand, I wasn't sure what the Protestant work ethic was, but I do think that the Protestant reformers, talk about work in a way that we don't anymore. Mm-hmm. And you were just talking about back in England and these different places where they're laboring over light posts in a different way. Mm-hmm. And so I think the further back you go, there is a sense in which people understood that their work was connected to a greater purpose. Yeah. And it was for God. I think we've lost that as a society where it used to be more normative. And so I think that's part of the reason you've gone from these amazing people painting the Sistine Chapel, right? And like all of their work was like they were wanted to be splendid. Mm-hmm. And we've gotten a little more bland as we've gotten further away from that. And so certainly I think this understanding for Christians, Protestant or whoever else, it should have that effect.
Yeah. And I think this idea is particularly American because you talk about the reformers, the people who came over initially are Puritans who are in the Reformed tradition, and they do have, and even in England, had a very noticeable, strong, and kind of 2 things, emphasis on family and emphasis on work ethic, right? Yeah. Not being lazy. Right. And so that ideal being transferred over to the Americas, and that is the culture where like kind of the American identity is birthed. You think about the Amish, who are very hard workers. Yeah. And for maybe some theologically questionable reasons. Sure. But they almost serve as sort of like a time capsule of what, work life 100, 200 years ago might have been. And so I do think there's a particularly American strand of work ethic that is connected to this theology, not consciously, but because of just the creation of the sort of American idea of a work ethic, I think is uniquely sort of linked to this theology that would have been present in the Puritans and the Reformers, which also, maybe this is a step too far, but I think a more conservative culture in America is more closely identified to this sort of line of thinking than a liberal or progressive mode of thinking. So you think about the coasts, which are a little more liberal or a little more progressive. They're less concerned about work ethic. They're like, hey, Bernie Sanders passed the like 30-hour work week bill or whatever. But then it's like you have really hardy, hardworking people in the Midwest and in the South, and that's true. And like obviously that's true of both places, but I think they're more the Midwest sort of farming rural communities are more connected to that identity than some of the more progressive like sort of liberal strands. And so it's just interesting seeing those very conscious theological strands of the Puritans, how they've influenced our culture, how we think about work. Yeah. Even with an atheist, an American atheist has been shaped by the reformers' theology of work, just by nature of being born in America.
Right, for sure.
So yeah, I do think it's the basis of the Protestant work ethic. I could talk about that forever. The answer is yes. I could talk about that forever. Okay, this person says, a couple times in your message on work, you addressed men as providers. Is it okay for a wife to be the primary breadwinner, including a husband that stays at home?
Yeah, so this one's super complicated, and I'm going to be pretty nuanced. I didn't say men were providers necessarily. I said, and that First Timothy quote, it's like he's talking to Christians providing for your home.
But it does say his.
It does say his. I have to dig into that, whether or not it's particular to men. But here's what I'm going to say. I'll skip all of the getting there. I'll just give you my end thought. When Eve sins in the garden, Adam's responsible for that. The New Testament blames Adam, even though Eve sins first. Husbands, particularly husbands, are responsible ultimately for their families. Doesn't mean the wife is not also responsible. He's just ultimately so. It is in his responsibility to make sure that his family is provided for. So I think what's normative and what's really hard about this conversation is divorcing the kind of culture and what the Bible actually says. And so I think while normative, he goes to work because it's women are more nurturing, even just biologically, like particularly back then, like, you're breastfeeding at home and like you got to be with the kids. And so dad goes to work, goes hunting, goes farming, whatever. And so normative for him to be not necessarily make the most money, but making sure the family's provided for. However,
growing the food, right?
Yeah.
Even if not getting a paycheck.
Right. That's also the other weird element of this is like the vocation is such a new industrial revolution thing.
Yeah.
It's like, so for most of history,
of
history, I was farming. And so, but if in modern times, the husband deems, hey, I'll stay home, you go to work. She wants to do that. It works for their family. And he's going to homeschool the kids or he's raised whatever. If that works for them, great. I don't think there's a biblical problem with that. It may not be normative, not a problem. But if she loses her job, she's unable to work, then he's got to go work, right? He's got to make sure that everyone's provided for. Yeah. However that happens, it's like in the same way, it's like, hey, if your wife is better at the bookkeeping, the husband, just because he's responsible for the family and the head of the family, doesn't mean he has to do everything. He's delegating that responsibility to her. He's accountable for it.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. But if something goes wrong,
the buck stops with him.
Yes,
but he can delegate that task to her.
Yeah, he came up. Why didn't you do the finances better or whatever? It's like, hey, you're actually your responsibility.
Right. Now, if you're both working, I don't think it matters who makes more money.
No.
So
here's the only other. I think you're right. I think the question is it okay? It's like, yeah, it's okay. It's not immoral. The only red flag or potential problem I see is the husband becoming lazy.
Yeah.
It's like if the kids are at school, like in public school or private school or whatever, not in the house during the day, and the wife is off working. She's a high class like lawyer or something that is making tons of money. So the husband doesn't really have to work. So bro, like if you're at home just snacking and playing video games, that is a problem.
No, for sure.
Like, you need to be doing something productive. You need to be working somehow.
Yeah.
And
you may not have to be making money.
Winning a national championship in NCAA 25 on the hardest difficulty is not productive.
For sure.
It's hard, but it's not productive.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that would be my only.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
Like, advice. Be like, hey, don't become.
Yeah. I'm saying in the most idyllic situation where it's like, he wants to be the stay-at-home dad. And I think that's, moms being the primary kid raiser is a very new thing. You go back to the early American history, mom and dad are both home. Dad's farming. Even if he's a lawyer, he's got a home office.
Yep.
And so the kids are being trained and developed and even taught school and all these things by their dads. And so mom being the primary parent is a very new thing. And so if for a family that works, that dad stays home, that can be okay if done well.
For sure. All right. Well, the last question, this is more kind of a broader theological question, but someone wrote in and asked, if you had chosen the wrong religion, how would you know? What would the signs be? What would you say to this person?
Yeah. Thinking about signs is really hard. Like, I think in one sense, the only way you would know that you're in the wrong religion from a sign perspective is if the Holy Spirit begins to convict you about it, right? And it's like prompting you to think about it or whatever. And I guess another sign is just like discontentment, dissatisfaction. But you could think you're a Christian and not actually be, and be dissatisfied. So it's not actually that. So the sign thing's really hard. I think the best thing to do is just to say, have you really thought it through? Have you thought through the arguments? Have you thought through the worldviews? Have you thought through the evidences and made the best decision?
Yeah.
Based on those things.
That's what I was going to say. When it's like, what would the signs be? It's like, well, some of the is that it doesn't make sense. Is that it's not consistent. It's not.
There's too many holes.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think largely that's why no one believes in Zeus anymore, or like Odin.
Yeah.
She's like, this doesn't really make any sense, and like none of the stories really line up, and no one's really even writing them down, and no one really even like this. We're kind of just seems like Kevin and I, everybody's just making it up. Right. Where you contrast with that. With the Old Testament texts, the New Testament texts, something like the Quran, which has a little bit more historicity to it. Not that it's. I'm not saying that it's viable as a
more valid than Zeus.
Yeah. And so I'm saying on a tier list, it's like it's a little more viable than something else. And so just thinking through those things, it's like, is this reasonable?
Right.
And it's like, I think one of the reasons I'm a Christian is because I think the argument, the narrative revealed in Scripture is reasonable. Yeah. Like it's a reasonable religion.
Right.
And so, and the only other way I could think is that you would know is, and that this is like a little bit, it's like a call to the Christian, the Great Commission you were talking about earlier. It's like, is if you see the true and better option.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, if you've only known, Hinduism your entire life, it's like you're probably going to think that's the best one.
Yeah.
But if you're confronted with the truth of the gospel, then you might be able to see the holes of an alternate religion better than if you were just a Hindu who had never heard of any other religion.
Absolutely.
So there you go. Hope that was helpful for you.
That's good. My favorite comment after the sermon was somebody came up to me and they said, "Man, now I just want to go home and work."
And you said, guess what? You probably will.
Yeah, you can.
Because it's not football season, so there's nothing else to do on a Sunday afternoon at home. All right. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of The Recap. We hope this conversation has encouraged you to keep striving to make Jesus essential in every aspect of your life. If you aren't part of our church family, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning. We gather for worship at 10:30 a.m. For more information, you can always go to myfellowship.church. Thanks for listening. Be blessed.